Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmie Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. Hello there, good people. This is Jimmie Gonzalez Jr., your co-host of the Legacy and Leadership Podcast. And we are on episode number 10. And as always, I am joined by Anthony Devon Watts Jr., my co-host.
What's going on, Legacy Leaders?
Hashtag Legacy Leaders. Absolutely. So we've been, just kind of somewhat working up to this point and in excitement. We having some conversations about other podcasts that are like, hundreds of episodes in. And we're on episode 10, but this is, it's a milestone, I would say, as we, kind of take a minute to look back over the last couple of months, and continue to look forward into the future. So if you are, a first time listener, first time viewer, we thank you. Just continue to subscribe if you haven't done so already, to our podcast, and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. That way you're always getting, not just to subscribe, but also make sure to click on that bell. That way you're always alerted, when we have new hotness dropping for you, as we like to say. Again, coming at you from the Legacy and Leadership Podcast. So, how's it going with you, man? I know it's been one of those weeks for sure. But I think we always have our kind of pre-production conversations, and just trying to get ourselves, really in a better mindset, man, to do what we need to do and to have this conversation and continue to hopefully add value to our listeners and to our viewers out there.
Yeah, 100%, man. I think, in our last NBA episode with Judge Laurent, we kind of talked about the importance of, kind of your network, your friendship circle, your support circle that you have. And especially this week, man, I'm just exceptionally thankful for the support circle that I have. This definitely has been a bit of a trying week, just given all the things that are currently going on out there. In the country, and just the civil unrest, and it just pains my heart, really, just kind of continue to see these things continue to come up, and I can, in the interest of just kind of full transparency, right, which is something that we champion as leaders, is critical as leaders in vulnerability. I wasn't even really feeling like I didn't have the energy to pod today, you know what I mean? Just like kind of where my soul is at and where my heart is at. But I was thankful that, we had the opportunity to just kind of link up and, through our little pre-production to get our mind right and just kind of talk through not only the things that we're feeling based off of, what we're seeing out there in the news and in the world, and the social injustice, the racial injustice, and but also to talk about what's going on in our lives, our personal lives, and with our family, and those things are always rejuvenating. You know what I mean? So I am in much better spirits than I was an hour and a half ago, before we hit the record button and really started getting into this episode. So yeah, man, I'm looking forward to tackling the kind of the topics that we have coming up today. But I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to our audience, to anybody that's listening as leaders. I really encourage you to not only lean on your support system in these times, when we're dealing with, again, just the challenges of a global pandemic, and People, working, at home, and the lack of internet and interaction and connectedness. And then you have the social justice issues that are going on as well. To please not only lean on your friend and your friends and your support systems, but also to check up on the well-being of those that you've been entrusted to steward, because this would be trying for anybody from a mental health perspective. The things that we're seeing, the things that we're dealing with are not normal. We shouldn't normalize them. We shouldn't just accept them as is, a status quo. The images of, violence and, just everything that we're seeing, those things are not normal. And so we shouldn't accept them as such. And you should, regardless of how strong somebody may appear or how in good spirits they may appear, I still, challenge you to make sure that you're checking up on them and asking them how they're really doing. Because I think you'll be surprised how many people are in need of, just a support system and an opportunity to be vulnerable and vent. So.
No, 100%, man. You know, yeah, just heavy heart, heavy spirit, heavy time. But I will, echo what you just said. Because even going back to last week, we recorded the podcast episode and still spoke for like another 2 hours after that. And a lot of it, again, was transparency and sharing and you being there for me, man, and, and helping me through some things and just, encouraging me. Even this past weekend, another very close friend of mine, Gary, went and spent an afternoon with him and my man. Grilled up some salmon and we had lunch and just broke bread and like talked for like 4 hours. You know what I mean? And we just, everybody, but I'm speaking to men specifically. We need that. It's very easy for us to get caught up in, machismo and just feeling, or acting again, like, we got it. And sometimes we don't, and it's okay to say that. And again, thankful for my brother like you and my brother Gary and just what you fellas mean to me and being able to have that support system and to be a support for somebody else when they're going through trying times as well. Again, none of this is normal that we're going through. We shouldn't act like it. And we shouldn't expect people to have kind of normal reactions, right? And again, right. Just mentally, there's just, I think, a lot that we're all going through, man. And again, it's just important for us to continue to support each other as people, regardless. But again, even as men, I think it's a little bit more critical just because the episode's not about this, but we can talk about this as well another time. But just how society, man, just, how we've been raised and kind of what has been put on men. And it's just important for us to recognize that we can be vulnerable. We can still be what we need to be as fathers and as husbands and as leaders in the community, looking to build and leave a legacy and still be transparent and still be vulnerable with one another and support each other through the tough times that we're going through. Iron sharpens iron, man. And we definitely need to remember that and to stick to that in so many different ways in our lives. So definitely appreciate that for sure.
Well said, man. Well said.
So, last week, man, as we were, wrapping up the episode, we were talking about what it means to build a team that has high affinity. And we were breaking down the characteristics for our listeners and our viewers about the attributes of that and what a team with high affinity looks like, and then what a team with low affinity looks like. And in all of those things, and when you're building a team with high affinity, it's about high performance and building this high performing team, which is good. I think if you're a leader and you have a team in whatever space, you want to have a high performing team that has speed of execution, that trust each other, and that each individual on that team has confidence in each other. They're going to get the job done to the best of their abilities, be transparent, be vulnerable with one another, and continue to move forward. But that's kind of, as you already have a team, and you're maybe even somewhat established, I think really, we wanted to rewind just a little bit. And you had talked about this, again. I don't remember if it was on the podcast itself or was like in our pre-conversations, but you were just talking about in your current situation, some of the activities that you're taking the team through in order to, one, for them as individuals to learn more about themselves, to learn more about each other as a team, and for you as a leader to learn more about the components and the makeup of your team. So I wanted us to kind of take a step back and dive into that, and really again discuss, what are some things as a leader that you can do to do just that, to assess the strengths of your team, to assess the characteristics, to assess the communication style of your teammates. That way everybody has a better understanding of one another, how to communicate each other's strengths so you can play off of each other's strengths, and how you use some of these activities and assessments to, again, build that team before you even start looking to build a high affinity team, but you're just really trying to establish this team kind of from the beginning. How does that sound?
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, I think that's appropriate, man, for us to kind of take a step back and just kind of talk through those things. And I can share a little bit about what I've been, kind of taking my current team through. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of break those concepts down just a little bit more. But I think, it's funny, what really kind of has been driving me to really walk the team through some of these activities is I think about myself, and I think about my own journey as a leader, and what has kind of been my secret sauce or secret power, right? Last one we talked about the Affinity Gauntlet, and I've again continued to binge watch Marvel movies. So if I use a lot of superhero analogies, y'all just gonna have to deal with this. What's on my mind? Literally, my oldest just came in here because the new season of Fortnite came out, and he's like, "Oh, they got all the Marvel characters in here now, Dad. Like, can you buy me the new battle pass first and foremost?" That's the only reason he came in here to get access to the debit card. But then he was also showing me like Iron Man and Thor and all that stuff. So, but if I think about kind of my secret power, it really is the introspection, as a leader, right? Being able to stop and reflect and take stock of my strengths, my opportunities, my shortcomings, things that I need to learn, areas that I can improve in. Like, I'm constantly reevaluating the quality of the interaction that I just had with anybody in my sphere, right? Whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's a developmental discussion, whether it's we're meeting about an initiative or a project, or I'm giving a presentation to senior directors and VPs, and I'm constantly taking stock after those interactions and reflecting and saying, okay, what went well, what could have went differently, what can I shore up, how can I improve? And so I think for a lot of leaders, unfortunately, when we're kind of thrust into the mantle of you're in charge, we're expected to kind of take the reins and start driving results as quickly as possible, sometimes not even getting formalized training on how to lead, but just expected that, hey, you're going to kind of figure this thing out as you go. Mm-hmm. And so because we're thrust into that environment where we have to start producing immediately, very rarely do we have time to kind of stop and reflect and learn more about ourselves as an individual and as a leader, especially when you consider that, like I take myself, for example, I stepped into leadership at the age of 19. I couldn't legally drink. I was nowhere near the man or person from a personality, from a maturity, from an experience perspective, from just a life perspective, that I would be at 21, 25, 27, 30, 32, right? In all of those different milestones, right, or as the years have gone, I've grown, I've changed. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not constantly reflecting and taking stock of how I've grown, areas that I've grown, what are my values, and reassessing and realigning and shoring myself up as a leader from that perspective, then I can be totally off base or totally off the mark in terms of what I'm producing or what I'm providing as a leader, right? I could still have some of those 19-year-old tendencies, or thinking that I still have some of those 19-year-old tendencies when at 32, right, I'm totally different, right? I'm totally different. And so I think these things that we're talking about, that we're going to be talking about, are good tools to facilitate a discussion around introspection as a leader, so that the thing that you can master the most is yourself, right? To force you to master yourself the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the things that I've been taking the group through is like D.I.S.C, right? I've had everybody on my team take D.I.S.C. And we had some really good discussions around that. A lot of them got introduced to that concept for the very first time, even though some of them have been leading or in a leadership role for 15 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is the first time that they're hearing something about that. I also had them go through Myers-Briggs, and we kind of broke down those things and what does that mean from a personality perspective and kind of your makeup. And then we also went through StrengthFinder, and StrengthFinder was also extremely valuable to take the team through. Again, so that they can learn a little bit more about the attributes that they do well, because I think we're naturally geared towards, when we do reflect or are introspective, we're geared to find the things that, like, we're not doing a good job at, that we're just kind of wired that way. Those things pop out to us. We're trained to find the opportunity, but very seldomly are we good at taking stock of what our strengths are, and then being able to play to those strengths or leverage those strengths. And so StrengthFinder is helpful to facilitate that discussion and kind of also help leaders understand that the things that you do are not, they're not mistakes. They don't just happen just because. They're not coincidence. Mm-hmm. There are things about your makeup as an individual, your experiences as an individual, things that you value as a leader that causes you to prioritize and have a talent in this area. And so we owe it to you to expose that talent and then talk about how do we effectively leverage it.
Yeah. As you say that, so StrengthFinders is one of the assessments that I've been going through again myself, and then with the team at the job as well. And we'll actually put a link for our folks, our legacy leaders, in the notes as well. But this is the book. I know it's probably going to be backwards if you're looking at it, but StrengthFinders 2.0 from Gallup. And I appreciate what you said, because I've been thinking about that myself as I've gone through it and taken the assessment again. When I first did this, I was a team manager. So we're talking about probably 16 years ago, the first time that I took the assessment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so taking it again now, there are some changes. So I haven't done it yet, but what you just said, I've been wanting to go back and say, okay, so how has my life changed? How have I developed, as a leader? And, why is that? That, obviously as your experiences change, those things lead into that. But it is a good learning experience. Again, like you said, to really take a step back and learn from yourself and how you've grown and what your strengths are. So I'll tell you, belief did not change. That is my number one strength. And futuristic, relator, self-assurance, and arranger are my top 5 strengths. Now, what I will say is, what I like about this, man, again, this is something that has been a part of my thinking and development of myself and development of others over the years. So the first time that this really was just magnified, because it is about knowing your strengths, but it's also about knowing the strengths of your people. And like you said, how do you help them leverage their strengths? And the whole premise about StrengthFinders is, when you think about it, the things that you're really good at, if you help somebody to do them more, and even as an individual, if you do those things more, you're going to be happier about yourself and happier about your production. From a production-based environment, when people are doing things that they're good at, you're going to be able to get a lot faster and a lot quicker results from them, as opposed to focusing on their areas of opportunity. Right, as a manager, as a leader, we've kind of raised, what are they not doing well, and how do I help them improve on the areas of opportunity or the weaknesses, right? But AOPs. But research has shown if you focus on the things that they're doing well, they're going to be happier, morale is going to be better, and you're going to get quicker and higher production in a faster amount of time than if you just kept focusing on, again, people's areas of opportunity. So as I was reading this book and challenging myself as a manager, I had a young lady on my sales team, and she wasn't good at closing sales. So her close rate was low. It wasn't meeting goal, but her average ticket, on the other hand, was above goal. So she couldn't get a lot of people to say yes, but when she did, she was able to build that average ticket. So I was like, you know what? Again, I'm learning this stuff. Like, so how do I, start to apply this? So in my coaching sessions, it's not that you ignore the areas of opportunity, you talk about it. But the funny thing is, a lot of the things that we struggle with, or again are an area of opportunity, like that's just us, that's how we are. So changing those things is going to be pretty difficult to do, and again may take a long time to change some of those things that are just kind of innate in us. So instead of just focusing on those things, again talking about it but not focusing on, I'm like, all right, well, you're really good at this, so how can we help you even improve more on your ability to build your average ticket? And for that month, that's exactly what we did. And, we went through different activities and role playing and everything that we would do in that environment to help her improve. And the results were amazing. Just again, seeing her numbers rise, seeing how happy she was. And when you think about it as a leader, and even as an individual, if somebody's always talking to you about the things that you don't do well, it doesn't feel good, and it doesn't create a good sense of morale and a healthy environment. So when you're focusing on the things that people do well, it brings excitement to them, it brings joy to them, and again, you're able to get a higher level of production much faster than if you're always just focusing on the things that they cannot do well and their areas of opportunity. So that really just reading about it, learning about it, and then applying it through coaching and seeing the results from that, again, like I was sold. And it's just been something that I've been able to continue to help other people with and just talk about and be reminded of myself. So it's cool that, you've been taking your team through that. I'm doing the same thing with the leaders with at the workplace as well, and just kind of revisiting, that whole concept.
Yeah, actually, I like the fact that you brought up the tangible impact that it has from a morale or an employee engagement perspective. Because you're right, if every time I have a conversation with you is centered around the things that I'm not doing well, then I'm going to want to avoid having conversations with you. And we know just how critically important it is from a relationship perspective or rapport perspective to exist in order to cultivate a high performing team and to kind of move the needle on things. And so, being able to focus or prioritize their strengths and kind of speak more to people's strengths and put them in positions to leverage their strength as much as possible in the work that they do, not only has a tangible impact on the morale, their engagement, the rapport that they have with you, and just the sense of value that they bring to the table. But I think what you'll also find is that it also feeds the confidence, the confidence of the individual in terms of their contributions and their performance. And that confidence actually is a critical ingredient to get people to start stretching themselves outside of their comfort zone and wanting to take on and addressing the things that are opportunities, right? Because
Correct.
It's not that I'm not successful, period. It's not that. It's that I am successful, I have success, and I can also master this other skill set, and how much more successful can I be because of that? And so I really appreciate the fact that you're calling that out, because, it is a little, I wouldn't say counterintuitive per se, but it's counter to usually what we get trained on as leaders, especially entry-level leaders, is hey, you got to find out what's not working, and then you got to go and fix that. And then you got to focus on the thing that's not working until it's fixed, and then once it's working, we may not even really celebrate that. We got to go find the other thing that's not working, right? And so that can be helpful from a process improvement perspective, a systems perspective, right? Hey, understanding the systems and what's broken in the system so that we can fix the issue in the system and create more efficiency. But from a people perspective, you actually, do more to raise the performance. You're more effective at raising the performance by identifying the strengths and then playing to the strengths of the team. So to your point, that's why it's important to take the team through this, because then you start to get kind of a stock of where people stand. And it's funny because I was sharing with my group yesterday. Was it yesterday? Today's Thursday, right? Yeah. So I was actually sharing with my group yesterday in our staff meeting. I was telling them about, just kind of a little bit about my upbringing. We were talking about development, some development plans that we have for our entry-level leaders. And I was telling them a little bit about my upbringing and how, the most valuable lesson that I got around development and developing and kind of grooming and growing, helping aid growth, actually came from my great-grandmother who spent all of her damn time in her garden. Like all her time in her garden, my granny, and she would be out there, and she'd be, she has, flowers on her flower bed, and she would, grow greens and, cabbage and all this different stuff. She had a tangerine tree, and I would just see her out there kind of working and, running around, trying to stay out of her way as much as possible, because, if we ran through her garden, she would have a fit. She would have a fit. But I'm just looking at her and seeing, like, as a gardener, what she prioritizes. And I remember her saying that, the real key, like, people kind of spend a lot of time focusing on what they're planting and anticipating reaping the fruit, but not putting a lot of time in tilling the soil. Right. And so I think when we're talking about, like, developing your team or developing a high performing team, and you're talking about identifying these strengths, identifying their D.I.S.C, identifying their Myers-Briggs, it's because you're trying to get a stock of the soil. You're trying to understand what is the makeup of the soil, because you can be one of the best gardeners in the world. You can have the greenest of thumbs, but if the stock of the soil is not appropriate for what you're planting, right, then it doesn't matter how much you water it. It doesn't matter how much you try and will it. It doesn't matter how much light you put on it. It's never going to grow. It's never going to bloom. It's never going to blossom, right? And so that's part of the reason why I fixate so much, not just on being introspective myself as a leader, but trying to really take the time to drown out the noise a little bit at times with my team and focus on getting a stock of the soil so that I can realize, okay, well, what can I plant that's going to actually grow? So that's why I'm excited to just kind of go through some of these things, because I think for a lot of leaders it'll be value added, a good checkpoint to say, well, you know what, I have had new individuals come to my team, or things have been moving pretty quickly. The last time I did any type of assessment around this stuff with this squad was 5-6 years ago, and even if you're working with the same people, right, the same core group of people, who they are and their experiences have changed dramatically over that time frame. Hell, it's changed dramatically over these past 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
Right? And so it'll be important to kind of take stock of those things, to be able to reassess and just kind of understand the soil that you're working with before you continue to plant seeds.
Bars. I love it. Understand the soil that you're working with. I just love that mental picture that you provided as you're talking, and just listening to you tell that story and how you piece that together. One thing that I do want to add is with the StrengthFinders as well, is helping somebody. Like I've always told people, man, and I don't know, I might have said this to you at some point, like I want to help you go from good to great, and then from great to outstanding. Right? As a coach, that's what you want to help your people do. So with StrengthFinders and focusing on people's strengths, the cool thing about that process, as you're helping them go from good to great, from great to outstanding, is that as those strengths begin to get even stronger and shine, they become so bright that it outshines or outweighs some of those areas of opportunity. And again, it's not that you completely forget about them. You still try to work on these things. But I want your strengths to shine so much that it covers down some of the other things that you might not be so good at for now, because you're outstanding in these other areas and these other aspects of what you bring to the table, and the skill set and the knowledge and just who you are. Like the tools that you have in your toolbox are just phenomenal in those areas. So if you're liking something over here, it's cool because we're getting so much value from this stuff over here.
Yeah, no, I I like that quite a bit. And actually, it's funny because I was thinking back to another thing I was just kind of sharing with the squad. You know, especially now more than ever, as leaders, and all the things that we're dealing with, all the challenges. And honestly, whether it's this year, last year, 5 years ago, when you're kind of in leadership, you always find yourself in this situation where time is finite. Like, we're always working on the new initiative. We're always working on something big. We're always working on something transformational. And so time is finite, right? And so knowing that, look, whatever I decide to invest my time in, as a leader, whatever I decide to invest my time in improving or working on, I am going to get 10%, let's just call it like a 10% improvement in that area, right? If you knew that and you really understand that, how does that change where you decide to make your investment and your time and your limited resource? Like, I know, was it last episode? Was it last episode or maybe the episode before that? We bought up the Patriots. And then you reminded us of the Giants.
No, that was last episode, yes. When we're talking about high-powered teams. And that high-powered team getting stopped by the New York football Giants.
Again. But this analogy is worth just hearing you talk about the Giants. But, if you think about, when the Patriots drafted Brady and they threw Brady into the game, all right, it would be very easy for Belichick or anybody to say, "Well, look, man, you run a 4.9. We got to get your 40 time down. We got to get you faster, right? Tom. How do we get you down to 4.7, 4.6, 4.5? That way you're a run threat on top of your arm, right? If they spent all their time focusing on improving in just the areas that Tom Brady was not strong in, what would that mean for the time lost or the time spent not spent in focusing on the areas where he is strong in terms of his pocket awareness, his ability to read, make smart decisions, his accuracy, and refining those skills to a different level to be where it became Hall of Fame status, right? I think sometimes, again, as a coach, understanding the strengths and not just trying to merely address the opportunities that exist, but really taking stock of the soil, understanding the strengths, and then focusing intensely on those strengths can be the difference maker between good and great, or great and outstanding, right? Tom Brady did not, I promise you this, he has not spent a single offseason since he's been drafted trying to work on his 40 time. He has not done anything from a speed training. He's not linking up with Usain Bolt. He's not, working on his track stance. Nah. But what he did do is he said, well, look, if that's not a strength for me, but what is a strength is my understanding of the game, how I make decisions. And if I can refine that skill where I can continue to get better at how quickly I make decisions, better at how accurate I am, better at ball placement, better at pre-snap, right? And I know we're getting into like some football terminology for some of the folks. Hopefully you're staying with us. If not, I promise you I'm almost done with this analogy, right? But it's the time that he invested in refining his strengths that allowed those strengths to continue to outshine the fact that Tom Brady runs a 4.9. But we still consider him arguably the greatest quarterback of all time to have ever played the game, right? And so you could very well, as a leader, be spending so much time focusing on what is not a strength for your team and miss out on developing a Hall of Fame leader by addressing their skill sets, just because you decide to prioritize the wrong things. And again, I think it's important. We're not saying neglect the opportunities by any stretch of the imagination. You definitely don't want to do that. Right, but when you talk about what you prioritize, especially early on in somebody's development, let's create some momentum. Let's start getting some early wins by playing to people's strengths and putting them in positions to succeed, so that they can gain the necessary confidence to then have an appetite to also tackle aggressively some of those opportunities while they continue to thrive and shine in their strengths.
Yeah. So with that, right, I think for our legacy leaders out there, I think we've made that point. Focusing on your strengths, allowing that to outshine areas of opportunity. But you mentioned two things that I want us to also continue to get into, and break that down a little bit for our listeners, so they have an understanding of. You mentioned Myers-Briggs, and then you mentioned D.I.S.C.
Yes. If
I've never heard that before. Let's
yeah.
and obviously I know a little bit about that stuff. So let's talk about Myers-Briggs and then how that kind of feeds into to DISC.
Absolutely. So Myers-Briggs is, for those who do not know, it's a personality assessment
Mm-hmm.
test, and it essentially is assessing you on four different categories or four different criteria that make up your personality, and then that information dictates kind of a personality profile and what are some of the strengths of that profile, weaknesses of those profiles, how to leverage your profile effectively. So it evaluates essentially you on if you're introverted or extroverted, if you are intuitive or feeling, if you're thinking or judging as well. And so it uses a combination of those in order to determine what your personality makeup is, right? And those things can be really telling, especially when you start to really dive into the specifics of them, because unlike DISC, your Myers-Briggs, your personality profile really doesn't change. That is a true reflection of like who you are in your makeup as an
Mm-hmm.
individual, a sum of your life experiences and personality quirks, and even a little bit of genetics. I know before we hopped on here, I was talking about seeing some attributes in my youngest Linux as like, well, you ain't get that from me, you ain't get that from your mama, right? Did you like? How do you have some of like my dad's attributes in you,
Yeah.
right? And just kind of seeing how genetics plays a factor in that as well. Um, you can capture that in your Myers-Briggs, and so that's really important when you're starting to look at the dynamic and the makeup of your team, because then you can start to tailor some of the ways that you communicate, some of the ways that you engage, some of the ways that you break stuff down or develop and teach to those personality quirks. Um, so that again you have maximum engagement, maximum buy-in, you have high morale.
Mm-hmm.
If for example, just like a quick one, right? If I have a leader who is a highly introverted type individual, um, it would behoove me, right, to make sure that from an engagement perspective or communication perspective, that I am not putting them in a position that doesn't align with their personality and their comfort zone, and then is forcing them to be extroverted. I'm not going to take that individual who's an introverted type personality, drop them in some place brand new and say, hey, I need you to start building relationships with all these individuals in here and close the next $1 million deal for us,
Yeah.
right? That's probably not a good um, strategic use of my resource, right? Of my leader. And so Myers-Briggs is pretty static. Now, DISC, on the other hand, I think is important for people to understand. And I know you've taught this plenty,
Mm-hmm.
so you'll be able to elaborate for sure. But DISC is not a personality assessment. And I think sometimes that gets conflated a little bit. Like people think that DISC is your personality. And that's the furthest thing from the truth, especially because, like I mentioned, with Myers-Briggs and your personality assessment, your personality does not change. Your DISC profile, however, can change based off of the role, based off of the dynamic of the group that you're working in, all of those, based off of stressors,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you actually do the assessment, one of the things that is really interesting to see is you get a baseline of what your DISC profile is when you're not stressed, and then you get a baseline of what your DISC profile is when you are stressed, when you're under
Yes.
the gun, when you're asked to make decisions very quickly, and to see how that changes just off of that variable of the stress is really telling, right? And helpful. Again, not just for you, but again, if you're assessing your broader team, it's helpful because then you start to realize, okay, when we're kind of under pressure, right? How will my team respond, right? If we have a really tight deadline and we got to get this turned around within 2 days, how are they going to respond? As a person who's normally high conscientious and very measured and thoughtful, do they now, because they're stressed, over-index into being very dominant personality, right? And now they're not really asking questions. They're like, look, I just got to take action. Or do they actually become more of a supporting type DISC profile,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or now they're a little bit more resistant to the change because they're feeling overwhelmed, right? And so you just got to be able to take stock of those things. And so I can tell you, for me personally, it's been awesome to see the evolution of my own DISC profile as I've changed roles and I've grown, because when I first started in leadership, I was a high influencer. Like I over-index in the I profile. So my instinct was to move fast, not really ask a lot of questions, and then to make sure that the team felt good about the change, right? Like we were doing this all together, right? So I was rallying the troops and making sure everybody felt good about the change. And maybe I don't have all the details, but I don't really need all the details because, what they said that if we do this, then we're going to win. And so I just want to make sure that we do it and we're going to all do it together, right? I'm obviously being a little flippant about it, but that's essentially a true representation of where I was as a leader very early on.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I had the opportunity to take on different roles and I moved into learning and development, I got the opportunity to work with you. Then I started to actually become more of a ID, right? And again, I think that just comes from the fact that you're working with new hires, you're responsible for making sure that they have certain behaviors and disciplines kind of buttoned up. And so for me, it wasn't just about making sure you feel good about it, but it was also about making sure that you're doing it right
Mm-hmm.
and that we're being successful, right? And then when I then moved into the operations manager role, where it was more workforce and process improvement, project management oriented, then I actually became a CD because my role required me to ask a bunch of questions when we were developing these processes and these new initiatives in order to make sure that I understood them and understood how they worked within the ecosystem of the business and then to communicate them effectively, right? And so in the span of maybe about three to 4 years, I went from essentially the cheerleader, right, to the as a high I to kind of the bookworm as a CD. Like, hold on, how did you get there? Can you show me? Can I see the data that led us to this decision in the first place? And how did they measure? Like, how did they actually do the measurement there on the initial baseline data to then say that we need to do this initiative? Like, I just changed over time, and so it was really cool to just kind of see that evolution of my DISC profile. And I would say as a leader, having that baseline for your team is helpful because then you start to understand, based off their DISC profile, how to most effectively communicate with them when you are disseminating change, when you're introducing them to change, when you're trying to execute on something, because each profile definitely represents value in its
Mm-hmm.
own unique way. And you have to make sure that you're communicating in a way that aligns with that profile to make it easy for them to then take the information and execute at a high level. If you have somebody who's high conscientious and you're not giving them the details and you're just telling them, hey, go do this, and this is why we're going to do it, and you don't give them an opportunity to understand the why and the backstory, that individual is not going to execute for you because they don't have what they need in order to feel confident about the change and to go be a champion for that change.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just an example. But I'm pretty sure, like I said, in your experience, man, having broken this down and having to teach this to plenty of people, there's a unique perspective that you have just around the value of DISC and then also Myers-Briggs as it relates to understanding your team's makeup.
Yeah, the one that I've definitely invested the most time in learning and teaching is DISC, which really is a derivative of Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is about 200 to 250 questions. Usually, you can find DISC, and we'll provide some resources for our folks out there as well, so you can find these assessments and take them yourself. But the DISC is usually around 50 questions, so it's a little bit quicker to go through. Depending on where you find it or where you take it, they might use different words, but you mentioned a few of them. So D stands for dominant, I is an influencer, S is steadfast, and then C is conscientious. So when you see it, it'll be in a circle and you'll have these quadrants. The D and the I are on the top, and then the S and the C are on the bottom. You may think, and even sometimes the words that are described, and you talked about this when you're talking about your initial assessment, I and D tend to be fast, and S's and C's tend to be, well, you can say slow, but it's not really slow. Again, it's more steadfast and more conscientious of the decisions that they're making, right? So for me, when I first took the DISC assessment, I was a high D. So when you were talking about you were kind of off the charts I was kind of off the charts D. Um, and again, there's a lot of good things about that. Is, being able to make decisions fast. When you think about a D personality and a C personality, what you were talking about, the C is going to need a lot of details, and they're very curious and want to know. It's not that as a D type personality that I don't want to know. Like, I just don't need all the details. Just give me a high level overview of what's going on. That's really all I need, and I'm able to move forward. So the first time that this was brought to light to me on kind of how much of a D I was at the time. So the first time that we really got into this, we were doing an activity. So we were learning about DISC, but we were also doing this activity to kind of get the learning session started. And for all of our folks out there, this is definitely a good activity that you can do with your team as well. So we had a panel of about 3 or 4 people that were observing. We had a group of individuals, and in this one, I was one of the people that had a name on my back. So it was a name of a character, and then so half of the group had some type of name on their back, and then the other half of the group were just basically individuals that we can go around and kind of ask questions to. So the whole point of this activity is you going around and asking questions, and through your questioning, trying to determine basically who you are. And they say go, and I'm going around and I'm asking questions, and it's just funny how as I'm asking people questions, like, I'm getting irritated, and if they're not giving, I'm like, you know what, whatever, bye, and I'm just moving on to the next person, and blah 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 blah. What? No, all right, let me go on to this person, and just kind of bouncing around. And at the end, I do not believe that I learned who I was. One of the other components about this activity, the individual, shout out to Matt Pennies, that was running the activity, he was a source where you can kind of stop and ask questions. And he's also, he's walking around and he's listening to all these conversations. I don't think once I really stopped to kind of seek help or anything like that. Again, I'm just bouncing around and doing my thing. And so, as a facilitator at the end, right, you debrief, right? You debrief the activity, and now it's kind of the learning and the aha moments. And he pointed out, I was kind of like a bull in a china shop, man. And there was evidence and there was clues kind of around me. And if I would have just stopped and slowed down a little bit and asked some of the right questions, I would have been able to easily find out, again, who I was. I think I was, I don't know, Batman or Rocky or something like that. But I was moving so fast, and again, not making quick decisions and not taking time to necessarily analyze all of the information. Basically, I lost. But it was just like, man, like, that's me. And we talked about this in one of our previous conversations. When I first took that, I also realized that from a strategic, conscientious perspective, like, that was really low on that first, DISC assessment. And that's what prompted me to say, okay, like, I see this area of opportunity. I need to work on this, so how do I improve upon my strategic thinking? And again, realizing this is chess, this is not checkers. Let me start learning how to play chess. And I started going through that, those activities again, to start thinking about how do I put my mind 2, 3, 4 steps ahead instead of just always on that first step and that first move. So that was the first one. But over the years, man, by now I've probably taken it at least 3, if not 4 times. But to your point as well, as I left operations and started getting into learning and development and being a trainer and a facilitator, that D started to lessen. I think as I grew from being a teacher, from being a parent, and I got more patient, the I started to get a little bit higher. So right now I'm an ID, and the other one's leveled off a little bit as well. But it's just, to your point, it's interesting to see and take a step back as you've taken it a couple of times and the years have passed, how the different engagements, the different roles that you play, and the external factors, how all of those things kind of play into how those readings kind of change over time. But the one thing, and you touched upon this, that two things that was helpful for me as you go through this, when you sit back and you really think about it, like, yourself, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, I would have kind of guessed that. But the cool thing is that it provides a different language and a different vocabulary for you to be able to speak to those things a little bit more intelligently, and again have some specific words to use to describe that, and to have conversations with other people about you and what your strengths are, and your how your makeup is, and knowing what you can build off, what those areas of opportunities are. And then the second thing is, it's cool to know those things about you, but again, you can kind of figure those things out. But it's knowing your team. And you mentioned communication, and I think that's the one thing that people tend to forget. So as I mentioned, if I know that I am trying to communicate with somebody who is a high C, if I try to come at them with a proposal, with a plan, and I'm not expressing details to them, then they're not going to see it. They're not going to want to see it. It's not going to make sense. When you think about somebody who is a C, again, they want to see the data. Now, they may want to see it different ways. Maybe they need to see a spreadsheet. They need to see charts. They need to see graphs. However it will fit that individual, they are going to need the details. So knowing those things about your team and your boss and just the people that you work with, again, it really helps to help you to be more effective at communicating, because now you're speaking in their language, which, especially if you're talking about trying to influence somebody, the more I can speak in your language and speak to things the way that you want and the way that you need to hear it, the more effective I'm going to be at delivering that message, hopefully influencing, continuing to build teamwork, and helping us move forward with whatever projects, initiatives, and the things that we're trying to accomplish.
No, you're spot on, man. Like I think when you hear people kind of talk about the lifeblood of an organization and change and all that other stuff, you always hear this mantra around like communication, and communication is key, and we got to improve how we communicate and refine our communication. And so there's a lot of lip service done to it, but there's not necessarily that work that needs to go into improving how we communicate. And so, to your point, this D.I.S.C is a really good tool to be able to use from a communication perspective to help ground you or anchor you into, well, how do I need to communicate with these unique members of my team in order to get them completely bought in or understanding whatever the task at hand is. And so what I also like about it, I know you touched on this just a little bit, right? The upper quadrant, right, being more like quick to act, and the bottom quadrant being a little bit more steadfast, right? So your D's and your I's are quick to take action. Your C's and your S's are more steadfast. They need more information before they can take action. The other thing that I really like when I'm looking at breaking it down is kind of how that left quadrant, your D's and your C's are more results oriented, and your I's and your S's are more people oriented. And so why that's important is because there is no perfect DISC profile for a leader. Like, you know what I mean? It's not, you have to only be this in order to be an effective leader. Each one of these profiles actually plays an important part, in the leadership of an organization, the leadership of a team. And when you understand where people fall, you can also be strategic about how you pair individuals up in order to put the organization in the best position possible in order to be successful, right? So pairing up somebody like you, early version of yourself, that high D off the charts, hey, I'm results oriented. You told me to figure out who I am. I'm gonna go figure out who I am. And I don't got a lot of time to play or mess around. I'm trying to figure it out ASAP, right? And if you can't help me or you're getting in my way of that, move on, right? Pairing you up with somebody who is a little bit more conscientious and is going to take the time to ask those questions and be observant, right? That's a really strong pairing, right? That's a really, really strong pairing. The same with somebody who's conscientious and somebody who's steadfast, right? yeah, they're both steadfast in terms of their approach and their willingness to move, right? But where it's helpful is this: the conscientious individual being process oriented or results oriented can help address the questions around the process to clarify for the person who's steadfast how this impacts the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And once that person who's steadfast has a good understanding of what does this mean to the impact to the people, now we both have the information that we need so that we can move forward. And so, um, I've tried to, even absent of a formalized DISC assessment. To your point, there are certain attributes that you can just pick up from observing individuals that gives you an indication of kind of where they fall. Not necessarily their full makeup of they're a DI or a DC or CD, right? But you can see where like kind of they default to just a little bit
Yeah.
in their profile, and then use that information in order to adjust your communication style accordingly. So kind of asking yourself, all right, from what I'm seeing, is this person more focused on the results or the people? Like in their language, in their questions, and what they're interested in. Are they results focused or people focused? Right? Are they quick to act with minimal details, or do they require a lot of details? And are they steadfast? And a combination of those two questions can kind of give you some insights into, oh, this person, they tend to lean more conscientious. Let me make sure I'm thorough in my explanation and providing not just the what, but the how we even got here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or this person, like a Jimmy's a go-getter. He's just trying to get results from me today. I don't need to bore him with a lot of the backstory. I just need to let him know what needs to occur, right? And then stay out of his way so he can get it done. I've always been just a huge fan of DISC ever since I got introduced to it in team manager school. Take it
Mm-hmm.
back, right? TM school, right? Ever since I got introduced to it, and just I've leveraged it so many times in my career, not just with people that report directly to me, but even stakeholders or partners that I've had to interact with. Because again, if I'm going to be the most effective communicator, I have to understand how do I communicate on their terms. It's not necessarily about getting them to understand on my terms, right? But about how do I communicate on their terms so that my message gets across, is conveyed, it connects, and then I'm able to influence and ultimately get results.
Yeah. One thing that I think is cool about the disc, and you mentioned this, is like when I first took it, I guess, yeah, I don't know if maybe just a different source that we were getting the information from. The breakdown of how that changes when kind of things are good as opposed to when you're under pressure. I didn't get that breakdown and those results kind of early on, but when I've taken it recently, probably about 3 years ago or so, is when I was introduced to that other part of it. And it is really telling to see, okay, kind of when things are good and everything is flowing, this is how I react in situations. These are the parts of my personality that come out. But under pressure, under duress, this is how I respond. Um, I just think it's important, for us to recognize both of those sides of us, and how we respond again when things are good and when things are not so good. Especially in this day and age, there's just been more days that are not so good, right? And it's all about your perspective, how you take it. But there has definitely been a lot of external challenges and pressures that would cause you to react maybe differently, right? Than if things are kind of going well and hunky dory, as they say. So definitely, again, a good assessment to be able to dive into. And there's so many others out there. Even my wife, within her role at the church, they have like 5 different ones. I can't remember all of the different names, but we'll provide some information to our legacy leaders out there. Um, I think the more that you can do to find out about your strengths, to find out about your spiritual gifts, to find out about your
Mm-hmm.
personality, and again, we can even talk about like the 5 love languages, which is more
Yeah.
relational. But even with the 5 love languages, it's important, not just about your spouse or significant other, but about your children, about your coworkers. Like if you know what fills people up from that perspective, and you talked about the people side of things, and emotional intelligence, and some of those those things that we've talked about in the past. It's just important to know how to communicate to people, how to express love to people in a way that, again, it's going to be right for them. It's easy to get caught up in, this is how I communicate, this is how I prefer things, so I just start to give that to people, but that's not how it works, right? So the golden rule is like, treat others how you want to be treated. That is true, but how I really want to be treated is unique. How I really want to be treated is, this is who Jimmie is. These are the things that I prefer, that I like. I want you to communicate, to love, to respect me in those ways. So if that's how I want to be treated, I want to be able to give that back to people. So very helpful, again, to learn about yourself. But I think the real key, and the how powerful these tools are, is learning those things about other people so that you can communicate and just have stronger, deeper relationships, more effective relationships with the people that are around you.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I think the way I heard it before was like, the golden rule is treat others how you want to be treated, but the platinum rule is treat others how they want to be treated.
Exactly.
Right. And what I really love about these things that we're kind of breaking down and we're talking about, right, is it all ties back into something that I know you're extremely passionate about, right, which is the servant leadership, right? It really comes down to just meeting people on their terms, as opposed to trying to dictate the terms people should meet you. And when you think about that word servant, in its truest form, right, it is about catering or providing based off of another person's needs and their desires and their wants from that perspective, right? So kind of going back to you being potentially Batman in that activity, right? I think about, how would Alfred communicate with Batman, right? Because he's not trying to dictate to Batman how you need to engage or interact with me, right? He's serving Batman and saying, okay, well, I need to communicate to Master Wayne this way, and I know that he prefers less details, and I know that he likes this type of food, and this is when he eats it, and this is how he likes to be loved or recognized, like kind of all of those things. So it's good that you kind of called out like the spiritual gifts and the D.I.S.C. and Myers-Briggs, and using a combination of these tools that already exist to understand those that you have to serve, so that you can serve them effectively and on their terms. That's the way that you're going to be the most effective. And understanding also using it to also understand you. I think again, being able to understand who you are as well allows you to avoid maybe some of your own pitfalls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just be able to challenge yourself and allow you to do some of the necessary work so that you can be the best servant leader that you can possibly be.
Amen. So, you started off by telling that story about your grandmother and the importance of the soil and cultivating the soil so that you can have fertile soil, so that you can have growth, right? As you're planting seeds and watering those seeds and looking to see that growth happen. As you're looking to be a leader worth following, it's important to leader means that there's people following you, especially if we're talking about the work environment. You have a team that you are looking to be a good steward of and you're entrusted with. So how do I help this team to grow? How do I help them to learn about each other, about themselves? If I'm still trying to add pieces, knowing, what my strengths are and then what the gaps are. If I have open spots, I don't want to get the same type of people that I already have. So having a much better assessment of your team, again, the strengths, but the gaps. So as I'm looking to add pieces, I want to add people that have a little bit something different, so that I'm building a well-rounded team. As a leader worth following, you're going to look to do those things, and again, you're going to look to meet people on their terms, as you mentioned. So we talked about the strengths and knowing your strengths, working off of your strengths, knowing your people's strengths and how important that is to build morale, to get higher production faster. Talked about Myers-Briggs and D.I.S.C and how you can use those, again, to assess personality, to assess characteristics of an individual, to help them know about themselves, to help each other be able to communicate better with one another. And then again, really taking a look at, now that I have a better assessment of the soil and the makeup, again, what do I need to continue to add to ensure that there's proper growth along the way? So yeah, I hope that our folks got a lot out of that. And again, there's so many different ones, and I think it is important to continue to search for a few of the different types of assessments that are out there, because they all kind of give you a little bit something different. So as you continue to piece that together, it just paints a much better picture, and continue to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, so it's a little bit clearer for you as an individual and for your team. So and again, we will look to provide some of that information. We may have to entice you to get this info pack on all of these different assessments and the resources that are out there available. So subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe to download our episodes. Really, three things, right? Is to subscribe, to download, and then share. Share the podcast, share the YouTube channel on all of your social media platforms, wherever you're listening to us. Again, if you're watching, don't just subscribe, but also click the bell so that you can get alerted. We want you to know when the episodes are going to be dropping, when the videos are going to be dropping. So go ahead and do that for yourself. That way you don't have to have,
that's like the Krispy Kreme hot sign. You know what I mean? Like when you hit that bell, that's that Krispy Kreme hot sign. Like, they fresh. Yeah, I know that. It's been a minute since I had Krispy Kreme, man.
Bro, you don't even know. Really quick, in Tallahassee, going to college. If you've been to Tallahassee, there's all kinds of hills and late nights. We're driving up this hill that once you get to the top, you see the Krispy Kreme, and it's like the anticipation. Is the hot sign going to be on when we get to the top? You get to that light, like, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Krispy Kreme. I digress.
It's so good, man. It's like biting into like pillows of heaven.
Yes. So perfect. Good. So good. I haven't had a Krispy Kreme donut in so long. So, again, I digress. Like, share, continue to stick with us. We appreciate you guys. As far as what's coming up, as we talk about building a team, so we talked about a high-performing team, a team with high affinity, what that means. We just broke down to you some different assessments that you can go through for yourself and for your team to learn a little bit about each individual and what their strengths are. But we also just talked about, knowing the strengths, but what are the gaps? So as you're looking to add more people to your team, you're looking for the right type of people to help fill those gaps and build a well-rounded team. I think in the next episode, what we're going to do too is, what are some things I should start looking for, maybe questions to ask, and kind of what does that interviewing process and that selection process look like as a leader, to make sure that, okay, now that I know what the strengths are and I'm looking to fill some gaps, how do I go about it, tactically from that perspective? So that's going to be on the horizon. Check out the next episode. We're going to be excited about that. Again, dropping the hotness from myself, Jimmie Gonzalez, and my boy, Devon Watts, and the Legacy and Leadership Podcast. Again, as always, we appreciate you guys very much. Continue to be a legacy leader, right?
Yes.
Live as a leader worth following. Teach, develop others to do the same, and in doing so, leave a legacy for future generations.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmie Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.